If you live in a normal house,
Mm.
connected to a standard municipal utility grid, you probably have zero idea what actually happens in the 30 milliseconds after the power goes out.
Right. I mean, why would you?
Exactly. You might see a quick flicker of the lights, or maybe you hear a microwave beep.
Yeah, and that is usually the end of it.
But if you are out on a sailboat, hundreds of miles from shore, or running life-saving medical equipment in an off-grid cabin, well, those 30 milliseconds are the entire ball game.
Oh, absolutely. They are the difference between a minor, imperceptible hiccup and, a complete catastrophic disaster.
And today we are looking at the literal brains that manage those critical milliseconds. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Thanks. It's a great topic.
We are looking at a stack of technical data, product specs, and system architecture comparisons for two absolute heavyweights in the world of marine and off-grid power.
All right. The Victron Quattro and the Victron MultiPlus II inverters.
Yep. And if you are even casually researching energy independence, you have undoubtedly seen these iconic blue boxes.
They are everywhere.
But the technical jargon surrounding them can really hit you like a brick wall.
Yeah.
So our mission for you today is simple. Decode the jargon and figure out exactly how these systems work.
Because the goal is to shortcut your path to energy independence.
Exactly. Without you wildly overpaying for commercial-grade features you don't need, or worse, underpowering your setup and sitting in the dark.
Yeah, because when you step away from the utility company, you essentially become the utility company.
That's a good way to put it.
You quickly realize that not all power is created equal, and, well, the equipment required to manage that power is incredibly specialized.
Right.
These blue boxes aren't just batteries. They are the central nervous system of your entire electrical existence. They dictate how you interact with the sun, the grid, your generator, and really every appliance you own.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get anywhere near how much power these units can push out to your toaster or like your air conditioner, we have to understand the architecture of how power gets into them in the first place.
Right, the inputs.
Yeah, because that is the fundamental fork in the road between these two models.
It really is. The architecture of the AC inputs dictates everything about how these machines physically operate. It separates two entirely different philosophies of power management.
So let's start with the MultiPlus II.
Sure. So the MultiPlus II is built with a single AC input. Functionally, that means it can accept incoming alternating current from the municipal grid, or it can accept power from a portable or standby generator.
But not both at the same time, right?
Exactly. You have to physically or manually determine which one is feeding it. It only has one door to let power inside.
I like to think of the MultiPlus II like having a single one-lane driveway leading up to your house. You have to choose who gets to park there.
Right, one car at a time.
If the grid car is parked in the driveway and suddenly the grid goes down, your generator car can't just pull right in. The grid has to back out first, and you have to manually let the generator in.
That's a great analogy.
But looking at the Quattro specs, it's a completely different infrastructure.
Oh, completely. The Quattro features dual AC inputs, so it can be hardwired to both the grid and a secondary power source like a heavy-duty diesel generator at the exact same time.
Wow, at the same time.
Yeah, and it manages these two sources using an internal automatic transfer switch, or an ATS.
Okay, so what does the ATS actually do?
Well, if the grid goes down, the ATS instantly severs the connection to the dead grid and switches the source over to your generator, so it keeps the power flowing out to your home or your boat without any manual interruption.
So building on that driveway idea, the Quattro is essentially a multi-lane highway.
Yes.
The grid is driving in one lane, your generator is idling in the adjacent lane, and the inverter itself is acting as the traffic cop, seamlessly directing who gets to proceed.
Exactly.
But how does that traffic cop actually work so fast? I mean, we are talking about massive amounts of raw electricity being redirected in a fraction of a second.
Right, so inside that multi-lane highway, the automatic transfer switch uses heavy industrial-grade magnetic coils. Yep. The absolute millisecond the internal sensors detect the grid lane dropping voltage or losing its frequency, those magnets instantly snap shut the gate to the grid and drop the bridge to your generator's incoming lane.
That sounds intense.
It is a purely mechanical reaction. You can actually hear a loud, heavy clack inside the box when it happens.
Oh, wow.
And what's fascinating here is the why behind that dual input design.
Right. Why build it that way?
The Quattro is engineered specifically for mission-critical reliability. We are talking about environments where, manual intervention just isn't an option.
Like where?
Think of commercial data centers, remote research stations, or off-grid homesteads, where losing power means your water pipes freeze instantly.
Got it. So it is built so you never have to notice there was a problem to begin with.
Exactly.
But the MultiPlus II, on the flip side, keeps things streamlined and affordable for setups where maybe you're totally fine walking over to a panel and manually flipping a breaker.
Right, or just plugging in a cord if the grid drops.
Or maybe you don't even own a backup generator to begin with.
And that is the reality for most people. If you only have one source of backup power, just solar and a battery bank, for example, paying for a multi-lane highway you will never drive on makes 0 sense.
Okay, so the Quattro clearly has the heavy-duty infrastructure for ultimate reliability. But I am looking at the specs here, and managing 2 incoming heavy power lanes inside a single box has a major physical consequence when we look at the raw output.
It does.
Because when we dive into the data on the muscle of these units, the continuous power, the surge capacity, and the efficiency things start to diverge significantly.
Yeah, moving dual inputs requires far more robust physical relays and thicker wiring inside the unit. And that directly alters what the inverter is physically capable of pushing out to your appliances.
Okay, let's frame the continuous power ranges first to see the scale.
Sure.
The MultiPlus II handles needs between 3 kVA and 10 kVA.
Yeah.
To put that into real-world terms, 3 kVA gives you roughly 2.4 kilowatts of continuous power, scaling up to about 8 kilowatts on the largest model.
Right. And the Quattro scales up much further. It starts at 5 kVA and runs all the way up to a massive 15 kVA.
Which translates to what?
Roughly 4 to 12 kilowatts of continuous power.
Okay, but I'm looking at the data for surge capacity, and the gap here between these 2 lines of inverters is massive. What actually happens inside the Quattro when a huge electric motor, like a deep well pump or an old air conditioning compressor, turns on compared to the MultiPlus?
That is where the Quattro truly dominates, and it comes down to a concept called inrush current.
Inrush current, okay.
Yeah. When an electric motor starts up from a dead stop, it has to break physical inertia. It takes vastly more power to get a heavy rotor spinning than it does to keep it spinning.
That makes sense.
So it demands a massive, instantaneous spike of power. Now, the MultiPlus II is designed to handle a surge that is 2 times its rated continuous power.
So a 6 kVA MultiPlus II can absorb a 12 kVA surge.
Exactly. And that is highly respectable for everyday applications. But the Quattro delivers 3 times its rated power. Yeah, so if you have an 8 kVA Quattro, it can handle a towering 24 kVA surge without tripping off or dropping the voltage.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back on this because the spec sheet is throwing me a curveball.
Okay, what is it?
The Quattro is clearly the premium, heavy-duty fortress of reliability model. But the data shows it is actually less efficient than the cheaper model.
Yeah.
And why is its transfer switch speed slower? Like, it takes 30 milliseconds compared to the MultiPlus II's ultra-fast 20 milliseconds. I mean, MultiPlus II hits an incredibly impressive 98% peak efficiency with near-zero idle consumption.
Right.
It just sips energy from the batteries. But the Quattro tops out at 96% and has a noticeably higher idle drain when it's just sitting there doing nothing. Why is the expensive premium model slower and less efficient?
Well, it comes down to the unavoidable physical realities of moving massive amounts of electrical current.
Okay.
Remember those magnetic coils and the heavy drawbridges we talked about inside the Quattro's multi-lane highway?
Yeah, the ones that make the loud clack.
Exactly. To safely switch between 2 massive incoming power sources and handle those gigantic 3 times power surges without melting the internal components, the physical metal contacts inside the Quattro have to be incredibly thick and heavy.
To dissipate the heat.
Yes, to dissipate the heat. So it physically takes more continuous battery energy just to hold those heavy magnetic bridges open, which explains the higher idle drain and the drop to 96% efficiency.
Ah, so you cannot cheat physics.
Not at all.
If you want the physical metal inside the box to be thick enough to absorb a 24 kVA inrush current from a well pump without literally welding itself shut from the heat, it is going to be heavier.
Exactly.
And heavier metal literally takes a tiny fraction of a second longer to swing shut.
Exactly. 10 milliseconds longer, to be precise.
Okay, that makes total sense now.
Now, 30 milliseconds is still incredibly fast. I mean, your desktop computers aren't going to reboot, and your LED lights might not even flicker enough for you to notice. But comparing the two side by side, the MultiPlus II doesn't have those heavy dual relays weighing it down. It is essentially a marathon runner. It is hyper-efficient, making it the absolute champion for standard solar setups, where you want every single drop of battery power to stretch as far as humanly possible through the night.
Okay, so the Quattro is the heavy lifter and the MultiPlus II is the marathon runner.
Yep.
But how does this translate when you actually try to wire these things into a breaker panel? Because in North America, dealing with our 120-volt and 240-volt split-phase systems creates a very specific balancing problem.
Oh, definitely.
You have two separate 120-volt lines or legs coming into your electrical panel. If you put too many heavy loads on just one of those legs, the system gets violently unbalanced and stresses the inverter.
And managing that balance is where system design either succeeds or fails. Both of these inverters absolutely support North American split-phase configurations, but while they approach the physics of balancing those two incoming legs from totally different angles.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want you to imagine you are loading cargo onto a boat. The boat is your inverter, and the cargo is all of your appliances.
Okay.
With the MultiPlus II, specifically the 2x120V version built for this market, it provides those two 120-volt legs incredibly efficiently. But it relies on a simpler, more passive balancing system.
Right.
It's like you have to pack that boat perfectly evenly yourself. You need to do the math to ensure the load on the left side of the boat weighs roughly the same as the load on the right side. If you don't, the boat starts to lean.
And if it leans too far out of balance, the inverter protects itself by shutting the entire system down.
Right. Which is not ideal.
No. But the Quattro handles this internally with much heavier hardware. It features a built-in auto transformer.
What does that do?
It's this massive coil of wire that natively and actively uses magnetic flux to balance unequal loads between those two phases in real time.
Wow. So with the Quattro, you can carelessly drop a massively heavy 120-volt air conditioner onto one side of your boat, and the boat automatically shifts its own internal ballast to keep you completely steady.
Exactly.
You never even have to look at the breaker panel to do the math.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it clarifies exactly who needs to buy which unit. Heavy 240V users, like large residential homes with variable, highly unpredictable power demands across different rooms, inherently need the Quattro.
Because they have heavy loads turning on and off randomly.
Exactly. You absolutely do not want to be running down to your basement constantly calculating which electrical phase your hairdryer is plugged into.
No, definitely not.
But if you are outfitting an RV or a smaller cabin, your electrical panel is usually naturally balanced by the manufacturer, or your overall loads are just much smaller to begin with.
So in that scenario, the MultiPlus II is perfectly sufficient to keep the boat low.
That's excellent.
You know, our sources also make a great point about global geography.
Oh, right. The 230-volt grids.
Yeah. If you are listening from Europe, Australia, or anywhere else in the world that uses a standard 230-volt single-phase grid, you can entirely bypass this balancing act.
Completely.
For a single-phase application, the MultiPlus II is heavily favored as the most practical, optimal choice because you get the peak 98% efficiency without paying for phase balancing auto transformers you don't even need.
That is the geographical cheat code. Single-phase 230-volt users get the absolute best out of the MultiPlus II without the inherent headaches of North American split-phase panels.
Okay, so the Quattro clearly has the raw muscle and the auto-balancing brains.
Yeah.
But I have to imagine that fitting two incoming power lanes, heavy magnetic coils, and massive mechanical auto transformers inside one box has a physical consequence when it comes time to actually mount this thing.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't just buy a commercial inverter, plug it in like a toaster, and walk away.
Oh, no. The installation experience between the two is night and day. Because of those dual inputs, the Quattro requires significantly more complex wiring.
I can imagine.
It needs far more physical real estate on your wall, and you have to install and wire up dual input breakers to safely isolate the grid and the generator lines. It is a heavy-duty electrical job.
And the MultiPlus II.
The MultiPlus II hooks up far faster. Since you only have one input line to manage, it is much closer to a straightforward installation for an electrician.
Let's look down the road for a second. I want you to imagine your ideal setup.
Okay.
Maybe today you're just planning to run a fridge, some LED lights, and a laptop. But what if you are starting a homestead that expands? What if you decide to add a heavy-duty woodworking shop next year and an electric vehicle fast charger the year after that? Are you stuck ripping out your whole system to upgrade?
Not at all, because both systems are highly scalable through a process called stacking.
Stacking?
Yeah, you can literally wire multiple identical units together in parallel. The MultiPlus II can be stacked up to 6 units, pushing a maximum of 60 kVA of power.
Wow.
And the Quattro, leaning into its heavy-duty identity, can stack up to 10 units for an absolutely massive 150 kVA output.
150 kVA is wild. But how does stacking actually work? You can't just bolt 6 independent electrical inverters together, flip them all on, and hope for the best.
No, definitely don't do that.
Because their electrical waves would crash into each other, create a massive short circuit, and fry your appliances.
Exactly. And that is the brilliance of the Victron software ecosystem. You connect the units using standard RJ45 data cables. You assign one unit as the master and the others as slaves.
Okay.
Because they share the same brain, they talk to each other in milliseconds, constantly checking each other's phase angles. They align their frequencies perfectly so their AC sine waves match up exactly.
That's incredible.
Yeah, those 6 individual inverters seamlessly synchronize to function as one single massive power plant. And that shared software ecosystem is arguably the biggest selling point for both units.
The ecosystem is huge. Both models integrate flawlessly with Victron's Serbo GX control center, which acts as the central nervous system for your setup. They both connect to the VRM portal, letting you track your solar generation and battery health live from your phone anywhere on Earth. And our sources highlight that both units feature anti-islanding protection to safely work with solar MPPT controllers.
Let's break those terms down because they are critical if you are adding solar panels. An MPPT controller, or maximum power point tracking controller, is the device that sits between your solar panels and your batteries.
Okay.
Solar panels produce wild, constantly fluctuating voltages depending on a passing cloud or the angle of the sun. The MPPT constantly sweeps that voltage curve and smooths it out into the exact, stable voltage your batteries need to charge safely.
And both inverters talk perfectly to these controllers.
Exactly.
And the anti-islanding protection.
Anti-islanding is a non-negotiable safety feature. If you are tied to the municipal grid and that grid goes down because, say, a car hit a utility pole, your inverter immediately detects the drop in voltage.
Right.
It instantly stops sending your excess solar power back out to the grid. It electronically builds an isolated island around your house.
Because if it didn't do that, you would be shooting live electricity backwards down the street lines while utility workers are actively trying to grab those cables and fix them.
Precisely. It is designed to save lives.
So they both keep utility workers safe. They both handle massive banks of lithium and lead-acid batteries. Though the Quattro can charge your battery bank faster simply because it has the physical capacity to pull incoming amperage from both of its inputs if absolutely necessary.
Right. But the core intelligence is identical.
Yeah. The true difference here is just pure scale. Unless you are building a commercial server farm or outfitting a mega yacht, stacking up to 6 MultiPlus units is going to provide more than enough power for almost any residential microgrid.
Which brings us perfectly to the bottom line, the value proposition. We have laid out the technical specs, the multi-lane highways, the magnetic coils, and the synchronizing sine waves.
Fun stuff.
Yeah, but how do you justify the hardware cost? According to the data, the Quattro comes with a 20 to 30% price premium over the MultiPlus II.
So what does this all mean? When you are staring at these 2 blue boxes trying to decide where to allocate your budget, you are really making a choice between paying for pure energy efficiency and paying for uninterruptible peace of mind.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
The MultiPlus II gives you that hyper-efficient marathon runner. It brings every single drop of value out of your solar panels and your battery bank.
Right.
But the Quattro justifies its 30% premium by offering true dual input failover protection, advanced phase balancing auto transformers, and commercial-grade surge capacity.
And this raises an important question you have to rigorously evaluate for your specific life. What does an hour of power loss actually cost you?
Yeah.
If the grid goes down, your generator doesn't kick on perfectly, and it just means your fridge gets slightly warm while you manually flip a breaker with a flashlight, well, save your money. Buy the MultiPlus II.
But if losing power means your basement floods because the sump pump stops working during a severe storm,
Or life-saving oxygen machines shut down, or thousands of dollars of server data is corrupted. If the stakes are that high, that 20 to 30% premium for the Quattro is no longer just a hardware cost. It is an insurance policy. You are paying for the ironclad guarantee that the multi-lane highway never closes.
to summarize this deep dive, the MultiPlus II is the incredibly efficient, streamlined, plug-and-play champion for single-input homes, cabins, and RVs. It will execute perfectly for 90% of users.
Absolutely.
But the Quattro is the heavy-duty fortress. It is the dual-power, surge-eating monster built for ultimate redundancy in environments where failure simply is not an option.
It all comes down to correctly mapping your hardware to the reality of your daily demands.
Which leaves us with a final thought I want you to chew on today. As we unpack the specs of these incredible machines, we see just how advanced off-grid technology has become. But as we move toward a future where everyday people are building their own personal microgrids with equipment like Victron inverters, it completely shifts how we think about the appliances we buy.
It really does.
Think about it. When you are plugged into the municipal grid, you don't care if a cheap air conditioner draws a massive sloppy surge of power when the compressor kicks on. The power company's massive infrastructure absorbs it without a second thought.
They don't even blink.
Right. But when you are the one generating, storing, and managing the electricity, suddenly a cheap appliance with terrible surge metrics isn't so cheap anymore. Because it forces you to buy a much bigger, much more expensive inverter just to handle its initial spike.
That's so true.
Are we entering an era where our homes will dictate the design of our electronics rather than the other way around? Where an appliance isn't judged just on its sticker price, but on how politely and efficiently it interacts with your personal power grid?
That is a fascinating shift in perspective. You stop being a passive consumer of power and you step into the role of actively managing it.
Exactly. The invisible magic trick of flipping a light switch isn't invisible anymore. You are the magician. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning how your world is powered, and we will catch you next time.